Welcome back to another episode of On the Line. I am your accountant, Samira Moyedin. Yesterday, I attended the Harets conference here in Toronto. Here is the program book. The conference had a mishmash of speakers in attendance, including former IDF generals and former Deputy Prime Minister of Israel. My next from the desk will be a very long dispatch from the event where the median age was 65. Protests were also held outside of the event, with protesters saying war criminals are not welcome in Toronto. My overall summary, though, of the conference itself was that people there were more concerned about Israel's tarnished image in the world than they were about anything else. The center of the conference was all about Israel and how to maintain what they considered to be a democracy. It was delusional and at times absurd. I was even able to snag an interview with the father of Zionism himself, Theodore.
What did you mean when you said the anti-Semites will be our best friends? Not in the mood to talk.
There was no talk of the citizenship and entry law of Israel or the other 64 apartheid laws that directly discriminate against Palestinians with Israeli citizenship that live within Israel's non-existent borders. That's 20% of the population. The majority of people at this conference clung to the idea that Israel is a democracy. There was talk of elections coming up, and really the evil was only centered around Netanyahu, Ben-Gvir, and Smotrich. That's it. The idea being that if all of these three people went away, Israel would go back to being a pillar of democracy in the world. Stay tuned for all of that later in the week. Coming up today is my interview with one of my favorite people and guests, Diana Buttu, the Palestinian-Canadian lawyer and international human rights law expert and former spokesperson for the PLO. This is the fourth time I have interviewed Diana since Israel's genocide began 710 days ago. I spoke with Diana the day after Israel bombed Qatar. Now, I had no idea that Diana was in Doha when that happened. You'll hear in the interview, she explains to me how she heard the strike, she felt the shocks, and so did her 11-year-old son. As always, we ask that you support the work we do. We cannot do this work without you. Please head on over to patreon.com/onthelinemedia. Show us some love and make sure that we can continue to bring you the voices you most need to hear from now. Coming up is my conversation with Diana Buttu. Stay tuned. Diana Buttu, thank you so much again for joining me on the line. I think this is the fourth time I'm speaking with you on day 705 of Israel's genocide. Did you ever even fathom that we would still be here after 705 days?
So first, Samira, thank you for having me a fourth time, but also thank you for doing what you're doing. Because you haven't taken your eye off of this when so many journalists have. So I appreciate you and I appreciate what you've been doing. Could I have imagined that we'd be here 705 days later? Sadly, yes and no. On the yes side of Israel's genocidal, it always has been. And from the very beginning, they made it clear that they were going to continue, and they warned people, and they said this could last for years. But on the no side, I thought that there was a system. I thought that there were rules. I thought that the world would step in. Like I just can't imagine that here we are with all of the red lines crossed, with everything from not only bombing things that shouldn't be bombed, like hospitals and schools and kindergartens and mosques and churches and people and kids, and tents and journalists and medics and you name it, but also the fact that we're seeing starvation, that they've deliberately been starving people, and now, of course, attacking other countries as well. So Israel's crossed all of those red lines. And I thought that there were red lines internationally, but it's become very clear to me that there aren't any red lines for everything from attacking Lebanon, Syria, Iran, Yemen, the global Samud flotilla, and Qatar.
In Qatar, which is where you are right now.
That's right.
So
I'm here.
You,
Yes, I'm in
you were
Doha.
there when Israel bombed or tried to assassinate the people that it purports to be negotiating with.
Yes.
What was that like for you?
It was quite surreal, Samantha, because I've lived in Palestine for such a long period of time, and I lived in Gaza for a year and a half. Now, I lived in Gaza during what they call the good days, being 2005, 2006, but I still remember what it was like to have Israel bomb buildings. They bombed one of the buildings that was right next to the one that I lived in at the time. And they used to very, very frequently break the sound barrier. So and of course in the West Bank, where I've spent a lot of time and lived there, I also know the sound of tanks and bombs and gunfire, you name it. Add to that the fact that I was in Haifa when Israel had attacked Iran, and so I know what bombs sound like. So being here in Qatar. This happened yesterday, and I heard what I thought were explosions, and I thought, and because you become so used to it, you think, oh, maybe everything, just everything to me sounds like an explosion.
Yeah.
And so I dismissed it. But it was my son, who's 11, who was screaming and saying, "Mommy, they're doing to Qatar what they've done to Gaza." And here he was, terrified and looking for a safe place that he could go to. And at the same time, I'm thinking, really? Israel's going to, that would be really dumb. And it turns out that they're really dumb. And they are maniacal, and they're psychopaths. And that they feel that they can do whatever it is that they want to do. So the idea that they lure these people in to discuss a 100-word garbage proposal and then use that opportunity to bomb them, which is the exact same thing that they had done in Iran as well. We know this playbook by now. But I didn't think that the U.S. would allow it to happen. And I don't know why I didn't think that the U.S. wouldn't allow it to happen. Because, again, all of the red lines have been crossed.
You mentioned the word maniacal, and I have that here, that this maniacal behavior is really dizzying. I mean, in all of those countries that you named, all of that happened in the last just 48 hours, including the bombing of the double bombing of the global Samud flotillas in Tunisia. Yeah. I want to go through some of the responses. So we have seen Spain come out. Prime Minister Sanchez impose sanctions, impose an embargo, and they're getting a lot of flack for it. What do you make of what Spain is doing?
It's about time, and I must say I'm very happy. One of the problems, Samira, was that in all of this time, as I've had many conversations with diplomats from around the world, but in particular in Europe, the refrain is always the same. It's, we can't do it alone. We need to have a coalition. To which I always say, why do you need a coalition? What, for example, Norway, they say, we can't do things alone. We need to have a coalition. It's like, really? Why does Norway need Israel? What exactly is it that Norway needs from Israel? Nothing. And so what I like is that Spain has broken this refrain, and Spain has decided that they're not going to wait for a coalition of the willing, because there's never going to be a coalition of the willing when you have countries like Germany, Hungary, and others that are just spending their time wringing their hands, worrying. So I'm very happy that they're doing it. It's not enough, and and also I think that one of the reasons that Spain is doing it is because they're seeing that there is global outrage.
Yeah.
We're not seeing the big protests in support of Israel, that we're seeing protests that are condemning genocide. And these are sustained protests. They've gone on for nearly 2 years now. There hasn't been a week where we haven't seen some type of international protest. It's the longest protest movement in history.
In history.
And I think in history. And I think that that these countries are starting to clue in.
And I see it even here in Toronto. We've had the week after week, sometimes 2 to 3 times a week, hundreds of people, if not thousands of people out in the streets. And you had von der Leyen coming out today saying, and I just want to quote her here, "What is happening in Gaza has shaken the conscience of the world. Man-made famine can never be a weapon of war. For the sake of the children, for the sake of humanity, this must stop." So she announced imposing some partial sanctions and then a partial suspension of the EU-Israel trade agreement. What do you think about her response today?
Isn't this the same woman who was one of the cheerleaders for the genocide from the beginning? And so we see that these protests are starting to shift, and they're shifting finally their opinion. But really, did it have to come to this, where we've seen tens of thousands of people? What we know of is 65,000 people. That's the deaths that are the death toll that is so conservative that's officially counted. But it's the flattening of whole cities, the bombing of each and every hospital in Gaza, practically every mosque, huge high-rise buildings have been flattened, the multiple displacement of people, the highest number of child amputees in the world. And so partial, really, but it just shows you that the protests are working. The protests are working, but the lobby that had been built up and this impunity that Israel had built for itself, yes, it's starting to crack, but you can see how strong it was, that it's taken this much for it to be pierced.
And yet there's still the people that are denying what's going on. And I just want to come to the fact that now 29 countries of the Schengen have said that they're banning Ben-Gvir and Smotrich from their territories. But then just today, Isaac Herzog is meeting with
in London.
the UK,
yeah, of course,
UK Prime Minister. How do you explain this duplicity? Like, to me, there's no difference between Herzog and Ben.
There's no difference. There is no difference. There is no difference. And people will, I get blasted all the time for saying that there is no difference. But for Palestinians, there is no difference. When you have the president of the country who has come out and said that there are no innocents, he came out very early on and said, we can't talk about there being a nation of innocents. No, they're all complicit.
It's an entire
that's a genocidal statement. It's entire nation. That's what he said. That's genocidal statement. Is it as crazy and genocidal as the stuff that Ben-Gvir says? Does it need to be? I mean, are we now measuring? Is there a litmus test for how genocidal it is? I thought it's either on or off. And so he might wear a better suit and he might speak better English than Ben-Gvir does. But the sentiment is there. And this is the problem, Samira. Zionism, in the words of Mohammed al-Kurd, is a death cult. And for Palestinians, Zionism equals genocide. The state was founded on genocide. The state continues to exist through ethnic cleansing and genocide. And what they're doing now is simply a continuation of what they did in 1948. And these are their words, by the way. They keep saying, we didn't finish the job in 1948. So if you didn't finish the job in 1948 and you're finishing the job today, that means that what we're seeing today is genocide. Then what you did in 1948 is genocide. So much so that, historians know this. The Israeli archives, they have never revealed all of the archives because they know they've never opened it up entirely because they know that there's stuff in there that's genocidal and that they don't want the world to see. But Zionism equals genocide.
I want to come to the word genocide, the sort of everybody's, not knowing whether to jump on the G train or not, or what to call it, what not to call it. Roz Segal, this is the Jewish professor of Israeli history and genocide studies, came out very early, right on October 13th, 2023, and said, this is genocidal language. Israel is engaging in a genocide, and it's telling the world that it's going to do this. And he called it a textbook case. He recently spoke with Chris Hedges, and he said that it's the death of Holocaust studies. I just want to read the quote to you. So he makes parallels between what was happening in Germany and what is happening now.
Yeah.
And he says, we know that Holocaust education eventually was more focused on transmitting this feeling of exceptionality than actually teaching about Holocaust as history, as real history, as normal history, as a part indeed of the making of the modern and late modern world. I want to ask you what dangers you see in this framing of the Holocaust as being exceptional or outside of history.
So, Samira, there's something really important when we label things. And so I'm going to get to your question in a second, but I want to hone in on this idea of genocide. One of the reasons that we call it genocide, and one of the reasons that Raz was so not just ahead of his time, there were others that were saying the same thing, but one of the reasons that was so important to say it early on, so not like the Omar Bartovs that have come around to it lately, but the early on, is because it's like there's two things that are the same, or not exactly the same, but two concepts that are the same, famine and genocide. And the reason that both of these are important to label early on is because you want to prevent them. You don't want an after-the-fact label. So you don't want an after-the-fact label to famine because then people are dead. You don't want an after-the-fact label to genocide because then it's too late and people are wiped out. But that's what so many people have been looking to, and that's the hesitancy, is that if we label it now, then maybe we're wrong. But that's not correct. It's the whole point is that when you see the indicators, you should be labeling it right away. It should be the canary in the coal mine so that people understand and do something to stop it rather than waiting until it's far too late. That's why I appreciate people like Raz and others who came out early and said, look at what we're seeing. Listen to what we're hearing. This is where it's going. And so going to the issue of exceptionalism and why the idea of the exceptionalism is twofold. One is when you create an exceptionalism, it means that you can never label anything genocide unless it meets that exceptional standard.
Yeah.
And then two, it also means that Israel can never do it because they were once the victims of the people who were Jewish were once the victims of a Holocaust. So it's this double thing of like not leading people to understand and to educate people about what genocide is in order to stop it or to prevent it. And then two, giving a pass to a country like Israel because, it's never going to meet that standard and because they were once victims themselves. And so we can't, it just can't fall into that realm. That's the problem with the exceptionalism. So going back to this idea of genocide and the hesitancy, I don't see why people are so hesitant, because if we see the indicators are there, and if the indicators are there, we should be screaming and yelling and having the world do things to stop it. That was the whole point of these ICJ hearings back in December of 2023, where South Africa came forward and said, this is what we're seeing. And the court came out and said, yes, but there's a plausible case here. Therefore, we should be putting into place measures to stop it.
What's going on with that case, by the way?
So cases before the ICJ take a long period of time. And on average, you're looking at about 5 to 7 years.
Wow.
Gaza doesn't have
So
5 to 7 years.
People think they're gonna wait for that gavel to drop, and
Exactly.
that's gonna be okay.
Exactly. Some of them take much, much, much longer than that. And that exactly is precisely the problem. Like, that's exactly the problem. So when I watch a BBC interview, for example, and there's this standard phrase that they have, this hasn't been determined to be genocide, or
CBC does the same.
CBC does the same, right? Where this hasn't been determined to be. It doesn't require a determination post facto. The fact that after the fact, the mere fact that we have decisions by the ICJ saying that it's plausible is enough. And the fact that we have all of these international and Palestinian human rights organizations who take their work very seriously and say, this is a genocide. Now there are 2 Israeli organizations as well.
I recently returned from a trip to Poland. I was there for
Yes.
a PEN International Congress, but I visited Auschwitz I, Auschwitz II, Birkenau. And I just don't understand why it's so difficult for people to see the parallels here. I really don't. I mean, the signs were all there. The starvation, the displacement, the making people work for food. I mean, the idea that people are now in Gaza having to walk 15 to 20 kilometers to a site that they may be killed at for a bag of flour or some lentils or some pasta, something that requires fresh water to make, and then march all the way back. It's just everything was there. I really don't, I mean, I hope I don't sound naive, but I really don't understand why people can't see these parallels.
I think they do. I think they don't want to see the parallels.
This trip, it was such a strange...
it's mind-blowing. It's mine. I have a lot of friends in Gaza, and my friends who are in Gaza tell me that, and I think this is the best way to understand this idea of like starvation, is that they say when you're starving, you don't just sit around waiting for food. Your entire day, from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to sleep, if you can go to sleep, is spent doing anything to look for food. So if that means walking the 15 kilometers, you're going to walk those 15 kilometers.
Wow.
If it means that you're going to have to dig through places, you're going to dig through those places. So it isn't just like a passive. It's starvation, and it requires energy, and it takes up all of your brain and body power to try to get food to fight starvation.
I watched those civil defensemen digging and digging and digging. As I watch them, I keep thinking, these men are hungry.
They're hungry. They are. They are. Absolutely. And that's but then going to the why it is that people can't see the parallels, I actually think that Israelis can see the parallels, and I think that they're okay with it. The rest of the world, I think, they kind of shut it off. There's a lot of propaganda that goes around. People just go on with their daily lives. But Israelis can see it. And in fact, the fascinating thing when you watch Israeli news is that they don't deny it. You'll get this schizophrenic way of watching the news, where on the one hand, you'll have somebody who will say, yes, we should continue to not deny them food and water and electricity and fuel and everything. And then you'll get some sort of commentator who will say, yeah, but we're not really doing that, right? So you get this like, yes, we are, and we should do more of it. And then you get the occasional commentator who says, yeah, but we're really not doing it. So it's like appeasing both people inside the country, those who are in favor and those who are opposed. But the vast majority are in favor. And I say that the vast majority are in favor because even though we're seeing massive protests in Israel, in all of the major cities, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people, these are protests that are calling simply for a ceasefire just in order to get the hostages. I have yet to see a sea of signs that say, stop the genocide. I've seen a couple of them, to be honest, but I haven't seen a sea of them. And what's fascinating is that I haven't seen that there's even talk inside Israel of releasing the thousands of Palestinian hostages that are languishing in these prison camps, these torture camps. There's now a torture camp that's that's underground. We have doctors and nurses and civil defense, like rescue workers who have been tortured and are languishing in these prisons. And the Israelis, through their own acknowledgement, have indicated that 3/4 of the people who've been thrown in prison are not at all wanted individuals. And when they say 3/4, you can safely assume that it's probably even higher than that, because their idea of wanted means, it's a very loose definition. And yet these people are still there, including a doctor, Dr. Hussam Abu Safiyeh, who was the director of the Kemal Adwan Hospital in the northern part of the Gaza Strip, who we saw. I don't know if you remember this image of him lab coat walking towards the tank.
Oh, yes.
And then the next images we see of him months later is very weak, very thin and completely shackled, and him saying to the Israelis, I don't know why you've thrown me in prison. Why am I here? Why am I here?
The most disgusting part of that also was watching the journalist basically interrogating him in the hallway with the police surrounding him. And it's just, Israel's media. I've been saying this for a long time. Yeah, I've been saying this for a long time. They really need to be thrown out of the International Journalist Syndicate. I mean, they are beyond genocidal. They really are running cover for the state. And not only that, they are engaging in that genocide in a way that I really, when I was watching that journalist walking down the hall and interrogating Dr. Abu Safia, it blew me away.
There's also another journalist who is on one of the popular news channels, and when the Israelis attacked the hospital, killing 6 journalists, this most recent attack.
Yanon Megal.
Exactly. Oh no, there's another one as well. Tzvi Yeheskel. Tzvi Yeheskel. He also came out and said, that they should have done this a long time ago. And, this was what they call the double tap, which actually means double bomb. I hate that terminology.
Yeah.
And he came out and said, they should have done this a long time ago. So there are so many of these journalists who've come out and they're carrying water for a genocidal state. And I don't know how we can take them seriously.
I want to ask you about the Jewish state, the Jewish ethno-state, really a Jewish supremacist state. How does it feel to be living there? Like living amongst this, knowing that, because I think that this gets lost in a lot of conversations, what it actually feels like day to day living somewhere where you live with this idea that people want you dead. They want you gone.
It's so hard for me to unpack, but I'm going to try through anecdotes. The first anecdote is, it's just what happened yesterday when the Israelis bombed Doha, and my son went into this frenzy. He went into a frenzy for a reason, because he's lived through this, and And for him, it was like, where do we go? What place is safe? And he recognizes that this is a state, and he was born there. He recognizes this is a state that doesn't want him, never has wanted him, and that he is not only unwanted, but that he's a target for them. So for me, I'm always thinking of, when do I have the talk with him? When do I describe for him what it's like? Like, when do I shatter that childhood, if it hasn't already been shattered for him already? But living in Haifa is like you live amongst people who either carried out the Nakba, who denied the Nakba, or who are apologists for the Nakba. Those are the categories. There's no other category.
Yeah.
And any way that you look at it, these are people who are genocide deniers, genocide supporters, or people who actually carried it out, right? Like it's the same. It's the equivalent, because the Nakba was genocide. So living amongst these people is to live among people who, that they want you out, they want you dead, they want you gone, and they do everything in their power to erase you. That's why there's such a heavy push to erase a Palestinian identity. That's why they erased Palestinian cities and towns. That's why they are trying to erase Arabic. That's why they lose their minds if they see that anything Palestinian, like if you carry a Palestinian flag, or even lately, if you walk around with like a little watermelon pin, right? Anything that reminds them of genocide, they want it erased, not just because of the reminder of it, but because you're viewed as being a fifth column. You're viewed as being that you're the one that's going to go after them. Exactly, the enemy from within. So going back to your experience when you were in Poland, it's the same. It's the same. Like it was the same feeling of, these people want you dead. They don't want you around. They speak about it very openly, and they make it clear that they're quote unquote tolerating you, but there's no tolerating you. They want you gone, and they enact measures to either quickly get you out or to slowly get you out. But the aim is to get you out. And I think I've mentioned this to you before. My father was 9 during the Nakba, and he was ethnically cleansed from his town, and his town was completely destroyed. And when we used to drive, it was called Lemjedel. It's now called Migdal HaEmek, and in that town now, it's an entirely Jewish Israeli town. It's right next to Nazareth, so it's about a kilometer and a half away from Nazareth. And my father's family, they fled to Nazareth. But I then moved to Haifa as an adult. Between Haifa and Nazareth, it's probably about 35 kilometers. And so every time I would drive from Haifa to Nazareth, we would pass El Mjedel, now the ethnically cleansed town of El Mjedel, now called Migdal HaEmek. And I could see this look change on my father's face, because it was the place of his childhood. It was the place that he was ethnically cleansed from. And I always wondered what it was like for him to grow up living with the people who had ethnically cleansed him from his town, and then not being able to go to it, only being able to see it when he became an adult, when he got a Canadian passport. And then also, like, what it was like for him to work with people who thought that was cool and that was okay, and that was necessary.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the part I have a hard time with, is that I live next to people who think it's either okay or who think it's necessary, and it's one and the same for me. And that my son is growing up in that same environment. That he's growing up in that same environment with people who think that it's okay or necessary. And in either way, they don't care. It doesn't weigh heavily on their conscience at all.
You mentioned that, thinking about when you're going to have that talk with him. And it reminded me of a lot of Black parents that I speak to about
Absolutely.
when they're going to have this talk with their sons about how to behave to not get killed.
That's exactly. I speak all the time to my friends about this very issue, my Black friends about this very issue, and there is such a parallel, and it happened just about a month and a half ago when my son was we wanted to go out for a walk, and he was wearing a T-shirt that's written in Arabic, and I think it was probably about a couple of years ago. He had a T-shirt that also had some Arabic writing, and at the time, my mom said, "Do you think that it's okay?" Like, she turned to me. She didn't say it in front of him. She said, "Do you think it's okay for him to be wearing this T-shirt written in Arabic? Do you think do you think it's safe?" And I remember being like so not not angry with her, but outraged at this idea that that we would have to police ourselves because I do enough policing of myself.
Yeah.
And then when about a little over a month ago, when we wanted to go out for a walk, and he was wearing a T-shirt written in Arabic, and it's written Brooklyn, by the way. It's not like it's got Brooklyn written in Arabic.
Yeah.
He thought about it twice, and he turned to me and said, "Mommy, do you think it's okay if I wear this T-shirt?"
Oh, man.
And I know why he's asking this question. He's 11. He's asking this question because he doesn't think that it's safe. He's worried for his safety. And again, it's a small thing, but what do you say to a child like that? And again, we're the privileged one. We're the privileged Palestinians. We're the ones who are not under the bombs every day. We're not starving. We're not being sniped. We're not living under occupation. We're the privileged ones, and yet you see every day these calculations that go through our minds in terms of how to live. And the reason is that this community, the community of Palestinians who hold Israeli citizenship, these are the survivors and the descendants of survivors. These are survivors of a genocide and the descendants of survivors of a genocide. And so they do what's necessary in order to survive. And so these calculations are calculations that we're making each and every day about how to behave, how to walk, how to talk, how to dress, what to say, what language. Do you say good morning to your neighbors? Do you not say good morning to your neighbors? You have to be perfect drivers, because if you dare bump into somebody, then, it's a terrorist attack. And so all of these things that go through your head on a daily basis, it's because it's all about survival. There is no room for being wrong.
Yeah, you can't make any mistakes.
No.
I want to shift gears a little bit and just go to the UN General Assembly that is starting this week. I want to know what you're going to be watching for in the next couple of weeks.
I'm going to be looking to see if the world does something against Israel. Look, the UNGA, it's starting, and Israel has bombed how many member states just over the course of the past year, more than any other country, more than the U.S., believe it or not. And so are there going to be statements of condemnation? Are they going to be coming out and condemning genocide? Are they going to be holding Israel to account? And I don't think we're going to be seeing any of that. I think we're going to see performative statements of recognition of a Palestinian state. And remember, the Palestinians aren't going to be there, right? Because they're not allowed to make it to New York. So we're going to see these performative statements about recognition of a Palestinian state. Probably very few statements about genocide, because they've learned to ignore it. And life is going to go on as usual, and a lot of pandering to President Trump. And that's it. That's what I expect to be seeing. What I would hope to see is something very different. I would hope that this would be about Palestine, that this would be about the system of international law and order that they claim to be part of and claim to uphold. And I would hope that they would be looking at themselves in the mirror and saying, has this system crumbled? Because it looks as though it has. But I don't think there's going to be any of that self-reflection.
The last time we spoke, when you were just talking with I was reminded that the last time we spoke, you said you refuse to relinquish international law.
I do.
To the Israelis. Do you still feel that way?
Absolutely, absolutely. I don't think that we should be living in a world where the bullies decide what is right and what is wrong. Israel's a genocidal state, maniacal state. And it's not, and we are so wrong to think that this is just Netanyahu. It's not Netanyahu.
Yeah.
It's not Netanyahu. It's not his coalition. It's about the ethos of the state as a state, and it's about Zionism. And I refuse to say that that we should just throw in the towel on this international system. To the contrary, I think if anything has been shown to be robust, is that these laws have not crumbled. They haven't bent to the will of dictators like Trump and to the will of genocidal maniacs like Netanyahu and his and the state of Israel. The system as a system and laws as laws have stayed on focus. It's the system as a whole that needs to be revamped. And that's a totally different issue. That's an issue where I think there's going to be global reckoning of in terms of whether this system is working or not. But as laws, they have not managed to change the laws. And believe me, they've tried. They've been to the ICJ a number of times. They've tried to claim that the occupation is legal. They've tried to claim that that it's not genocide. And at every single juncture, we've seen that Israel has lost. So I'm not going to give up on that, the laws as a set of laws. But I do think that the system as a system to hold countries to account, there needs to be a global reckoning. And that global reckoning is starting. When you see people in the tens of thousands coming out, it used to be the case, and this was a conversation I had with a diplomat very early on. Somebody said to me, when we see 100,000 people coming out in London, that's well and good, but we don't think about the 100,000. We think about the millions that didn't come out. So you can see how perverse the thinking is.
Yes.
But when it gets to the point where it's not just a few thousand, but it's in the hundreds of thousands and beyond, and it's not just in one capital, but it's globally, that global reckoning is happening, and it's happening now. It's happening now, and it needs to happen. And all of these leaders are going to be facing a time where their scorecards are going to be scrutinized, and it's not going to look pretty for them. Israel, zero. And again, the scorecard's not going to look good for Canada.
It's been atrocious here. I mean, Carney's statements of he wants to see a Zionist Palestinian state will go down in history as one of the most absurd things I ever heard in my life.
Absolutely.
I think I'll leave it there. Thank you so much again.
Thank you, Samira. Thanks, and thanks for doing what you're doing.